On January 23, 2018, Subnautica was released after a period of over 3 years in early access. The game quickly became one of the most successful indie games of all time, spawning a sequel and plenty of interest in more stories set in the universe created by the folks at Unknown Worlds Entertainment. One of the many things that sets the game apart from its competition in the survival craft genre is its setting. Like 90% of the game takes place underwater. Of course, they then decided to get what made the game special and turned that percentage into a 70% for the sequel in a move I simply cannot understand, but oh well, Below Zero was still a fantastic game. And yes, I am pulling these percentages out of my ass, but the point is clear, most of both games were underwater. And that's precisely one of the main aspects that made Subnautica such a special experience. However, a very interesting phenomenon happened. A ton of people believe it to be a great addition to the horror genre, except that was not the developer's original intentions. Game director Charlie Cleveland addressed how Subnautica accidentally became a horror game in multiple interviews and even in a GDC talk called Design of Subnautica. He says a lot of things that are relevant to the video and will be discussed eventually, but a quote I like is specifically from a Rock Paper Shotgun interview from January 2018, in which he says that the horror aspect of the game overshadows what 75% of the game is, which is kind of serene swimming and exploring and crafting. Now, serene swimming was certainly not 75% of my experience with the game, as I was constantly tense as soon as I left my base, but the fact remains that Subnautica was not intended, at least at first, to terrify the player as much as it does, or at all even. And this is not the only example of its kind. If you take a look at the Steam store page for another game we'll check out in this video, Silt, you'll see that the only place horror is mentioned is in the Steam user tags. In fact, the worst they call the game is unsettling, but the actual genre they mention is atmospheric puzzle adventure. However, having played Silt, I'm pretty confident in saying that yeah, this game is goddamn terrifying in some moments. The bottom line of what I'm trying to say is this. Apparently, underwater is an incredibly effective setting for horror games, so much so that even games that are not meant to be in the genre may end up scaring folks or making them feel super tense. And when you take a look at many of the games that take place underwater, be it in facilities or in the open ocean, you'll find that, yeah, quite a few are horror games. As a fan of lots of these titles, and a person who finds underwater horror fascinating in general, I decided to take it upon myself to figure out what makes it such an effective setting, or even if that's the case at all. I've sorta done this already with a video exploring how Subnautica accidentally became a horror game, but truth be told I'm no longer happy with it, and it might even be delisted by the time you watch this. This time I decided to go beyond, bigger, and take a look at 6 different underwater games. That's a low enough amount that you hopefully won't get tired, but enough for patterns to form and be analyzed, with the objective to answer if and why underwater horror is so effective in games. Since there's a lot to cover, I'll first talk about general aspects unrelated to games that make this an incredible setting for horror. Then I'll talk about all 6 games so that I can talk about the influences the setting has on the horror gameplay using the games as supporting evidence. Just be advised that there are spoilers for the games mentioned. Sometimes they'll be mild, sometimes, especially in Aaronlung's case, they will be major. They will also be in chapters in the video, so you can skip their section if need be. So welcome to a long ass video about underwater horror games. The fear of the ocean, or fears related to it or water in general, all seem very common, and chances are you know someone who's afraid of drowning, going deep into the sea, or something like that. If you doubt me, I unfortunately can't give you proper research done with thousands and thousands of people worldwide simply because I couldn't find any that fast, but I did find a few surveys that help paint the picture. Chapman University, for example, releases a yearly survey listing lots of fears for Americans to rank. The number of participants varies from year to year, but it seems to always be between 1,000 and 2,000. In 2022 and 2023, between 25 and 30% of the participants declare to be afraid or very afraid of deep lakes and oceans. Lots of the fears were higher up than this, but still 25 to 30% is a big number. I'll link this and other surveys in the description of the video if you wish to look into percentages yourself. This phenomena is further observed in, well, all sorts of media, really. We have movies such as Jaws, which deal with underwater threats, to others such as 2012, which deal with, well, world-ending floods would be a way to put it. We have, of course, myths related to the ocean, such as tales of Poseidon's anger in Greek mythology. We have many examples in literature, with the prominent example of Mr. Octopus Face himself, Cthulhu, being a deity that rests within a submerged city. Many of these examples also cross into other forms of media. For example, how many Lovecraftian movies or games do you think there are? I can think of at least 5 video games that include Cthulhu alone, let alone other deities. These works may not always be horror-oriented, but they do often depict the ocean or the creatures within as perilous. By now, some of you might be thinking that there are media of all sorts that also depict the ocean or water as beneficial. Not only that, but lots of random things can be depicted as threats, so it really makes no sense for me to single out the underwater setting, especially not if I just cherry-pick examples to prove my point. To you, I say thank you for the concern, but I know all this. Look for movies and media that prove that forests are dangerous, and you'll find plenty, for example. And again, you'll find plenty that depict forests as relaxing environments. It doesn't matter. I'm singling out the underwater setting simply because I find it fascinating with a very unique combination of elements which we will get into. Someday I might do a video about forest games, but that day is not today. And I'm choosing to focus on works that show water or underwater creatures as threats simply because they demonstrate that the fear of the setting has been in some people's minds for a long time. No fear is universal though, so of course there will also be work that shows the opposite. And that's fine. But honestly, I think it's understandable for so many folks to fear something water related, as getting careless or unlucky with it might just mean death. The most famous incident is likely the Titanic, a disaster that resulted in the deaths of 1,517 passengers. Most recently, we also had the implosion of the Titan submarine when it was searching precisely for the wreck of the Titanic. And that's not to mention the innate fear lots of people have of many aquatic creatures such as sharks. But at the same time, while we are keenly aware of the dangers of the ocean, we also have no idea just how dangerous, or not, it is. According to National Geographic, more than 80% of the ocean has never been mapped, explored, or even seen by humans. Not knowing what's down there allows lots of people's imagination to play tricks on them, causing them to fear the unknown. This is one fear we will see explored plenty in the games we're gonna look at. On a personal anecdote, even if I don't fear the ocean, I sure as hell respect it. I grew up next to a beach and I still remember the day that taught me that lesson. I was a kid playing near the shore within view of my parents who were sunbathing. I was letting the waves crash on me because, well, I actually have no idea. Kids do dumb things sometimes, I guess I found it fun. At some point, this one wave twice my size formed and I excitedly rushed in front of it, only for it to, as intended, crash on top of me. Few seconds of my entire body being tossed around while submerged, with my face being dragged over sand before I washed up quite a ways away from where I stood just a few seconds prior. When I opened my eyes, I legitimately had no idea where I was, which thankfully wasn't an issue because my mom came running after me. I was fine, but I never forgot that experience. Again, none of the experiences, or the Titanic or Titan or anything bad, means that deep bodies of water or the animals within them are objectively bad and fear-inducing. No, because fear is subjective. All I'm doing is establishing reasons why many people do fear these or related things. And why am I trying to establish that, you might ask? Well, if we're going to discuss reasons why underwater games can be so effective in the horror department, I feel like I couldn't ignore the potentially biggest reason. Plenty of people have phobias and fears related to the setting in real life, which automatically makes anything set in the water, horror game or not, that much more effective at generating fear. The very real examples of death and injuries due to complications underwater, such as drowning, may make the virtual threat more tangible for a lot of people. It does for me anyway. And yes, I said may because at the end of the day, all I can do in this video is speculate. I can bring developer interviews, I can share my thoughts, but again, fear is very particular, so most of what I'm saying may not apply to you specifically. But it will to someone else, just as whatever argument I use that applies to you will not apply to lots of other people listening. This potential innate fear of something related to water is not really dependent on any video games and can impact how a person perceives not only the games in this list, but any sort of media, which is why this discussion had to come first. I do have other arguments that I want to bring to light, but those depend on the analysis of the 6 games I played in preparation for this video. So before we go any further and actually get into these other arguments, we need to set the stage with a brief description of what each game is all about and how they managed to create a tense atmosphere. Since I opened this video with Subnautica, might as well just start this next section with the very same game. Subnautica is a first-person exploration. Hold on, I'm pretty sure I don't need to tell you about this game. Sitting at over 230,000 reviews on Steam alone, this is one of the most well-known indie games ever created. And honestly, the fame is warranted. This is an absolute gem of a game and embodies so many of the topics I'll be bringing up in this video that it just felt fitting to talk about Subnautica before anything else. In this game, exploration drives your progress. You can hang out in the safe shallows where your original pod is located for pretty much as long as you want, as you can easily transform the fish around you into food and water if playing with survival elements turned on. If they're turned off, you don't even need to worry about that. However, to actually progress, be it on the construction of your base or in the actual storyline of the game, you will need to venture out into progressively deeper biomes and locations within this alien water world. While the game is open world, progression is cleverly guided by the use of radio messages that create pings that you can follow to track transmissions. Usually, those lead to biomes with resources you need to progress past whatever point you currently are in the game. While everything I'm talking about so far seems rather peaceful, it turns out that Subnautica is anything but peaceful. Most locations are pretty unique, and yes, the deeper you go, the more dangerous things tend to get, with creatures much bigger than you trying to eat you for lunch. The most horrifying ones are part of the Leviathan class, a name which I'm sure most of you recognize. I'd wager lots of you have not forgotten our first encounter with one, which I'm guessing was the Reaper Leviathan near the Aurora, and that speaks volumes as to how effective the horror or terror aspect is in Subnautica. The water around the ship is a yellowish hue which limits visibility. Due to that, you'll likely hear the monster before you see it. And just a fun fact, if you hear it, it knows where you are. The Reaper Leviathan behaves and sounds like a predator, and while terrifying, it's likely not even the biggest problem you're gonna deal with. The point is, Subnautica excels at causing terror, that is, the anticipation of danger, by tapping into many sources of fear. The waters can often be pitch black save for your general vicinity, making us carefully proceed as we fear whatever may be seeing us that we currently can't see. The game's absolutely incredible sound design only enhances this effect, making dangerous monsters emit some loud noises sometimes, which in turn makes players look around non-stop in low visibility trying to figure out if they are in danger. If you're underwater, you're dealing with the famous 6 degrees of freedom, meaning that you have to worry about being attacked not only from the 4 cardinal directions, but also above, below, and pretty much anywhere, unless there's a wall to block the path. Being alone is also a problem, you just know nobody's gonna help you. Oftentimes, when the silence is broken, it's not something you want to hear. Things such as the aforementioned screams or even terrible PDA messages. Show of hands here. How many of you that actually played Subnautica turned around and swam the hell away as soon as you received this message from your PDA?
Detecting multiple Leviathan class life forms in the region. Are you certain whatever you're doing is worth it?
Hell, there's not even an actual damaging weapon to fight back against these predators until you get the prawn suit anyway. Or if you're like super brave and have no problem staking on creatures 10 times your size with a thermal knife and no protection. I suppose the stasis rifle can help with that, but I was definitely not ballsy enough to attempt killing anything with this combo. I think by now it's pretty clear that Subnautica manages to be an absolutely terrifying game, and there are parts of its setting that help it get there. But now, I'll point you to another game that has you playing in first person, diving into an alien water world and dealing with colossal creatures, and yet it plays and feels completely different from Subnautica. Iron Lung is a first-person game made by developer David Szymanski, I hope I pronounced that right, of Dusk fame. He actually did an incredibly impressive job here, and while I'm sure lots of you have heard of or played this game before, I urge you those who haven't to go check the game out. It became a bit of a modern cult classic, inspiring other games to release similar experiences, Sinking Iron being the most recent one, and there's even a movie on the way. Both are understandable facts, as Iron Lung is genuinely one of the most unique horror games I've played in a long time. In the game, every single star and habitable planet randomly vanished, and the only survivals left were those who were in man-made places in outer space, such as a space station. Since then, survivors have been in a desperate struggle to find resources in whatever's left of the universe. The game takes place in one of the universe's many barren moons. Well, kinda. The moon is actually covered by a blood ocean, and since there might be some intergalactic secret that ensures humanity's survival hidden within the ocean, you get sent down there to investigate. You may notice I said get sent. That's because you don't have a choice. Your character is a convict and their sentence is to go there in a shitty submarine called the Iron Lung to take pictures of what's at the bottom of the trench in the ocean. The vehicle is so bad in fact that they have to weld your character inside and close the forward window so that the submarine doesn't implode from the pressure. And this is the scenario Iron Lung thrusts the player into. Locked inside a tiny submarine with nothing but a shoddy camera to see the underwater world outside. And I say shoddy because there's really no other way to describe it. The camera is so bad that once you press the button to take a picture, there's a few seconds of delay before you get the grainy result. While Iron Lung shares aspects of its setting and first-person gameplay with Subnautica, there's not much else to be found in terms of major similarities. While Subnautica is a big open world with many movement options and places to visit, Iron Lung is small. For the majority of the gameplay, you will be studying your map and pressing buttons to move your submarine according to its current coordinates. There is a radar on the table that indicates if there's an obstacle near you in any of the 4 cardinal directions. The faster it beeps, the closer you are to said obstacle. Simple, right? Well, the brilliance of Iron Lung lies precisely in its simplicity. As you descend in the beginning of the game, you're in contact with someone via radio. As soon as you reach the lowest depth available, the radio cuts off, leaving you unable to communicate with command. That means that from the get-go, you are completely isolated, both due to the inability to talk to anyone, as well as due to the lack of real-time sight of whatever lies outside your submarine. This isolation, the slow movement of the submarine, and the build-up as you try to reach the specified coordinates to take each of your goal pictures all act together to create one of the most tense atmospheres I've seen in a horror game. And if that wasn't enough, the developer does an incredible job of taking advantage of this foundation by making it clear that the environment is hostile and that you cannot do anything to protect yourself. It starts off simple enough, with what seems like a roar breaking the silence of your coordinate management gameplay. Occasionally you will get a robotic voice from the submarine telling you your oxygen levels are lowering,
Oxygen notification.
or a loud noise as the pressure slowly destroys your submarine, opening up more and more leaks in the pipes. But it doesn't stop there, though you might wish it did. Iron Lung first got me when I was piloting my submarine to, I think, the 4th or 5th photo spot out of the 10 in the game. I was actually relaxed while performing my tasks, as I find there's something oddly meditative about checking coordinates in a map and planning a route accordingly. However, that quickly changed when, out of the blue, away from any walls, the radar quickly blinked and beeped extremely fast. I ran for a picture, but alas, there was nothing there. Just as quickly as the radar started, it stopped. With no way to investigate my surroundings, I was left to wonder what just happened. And really, when you think about it, there's only one possible explanation. Something big enough to trigger the radar had swum right next to the submarine. From there, things only got worse. A photo spot had a massive fish that disappeared the moment I took another picture of the same place. Another spot had me navigating an extremely tight corridor with constant radar beeping as I was surrounded by walls, only to end up finding an anomaly that teleported me out of there. And the damn phantom radar beeps continued, but always vanished before I could turn my submarine around to face them and take a picture. Until they showed up right in front of the iron lung. I rushed, took a picture, and... well, let's just say I wish I hadn't. The first time I played Iron Lung was quite a while back, and yet I still remember all this vividly. Even though the game doesn't really do much of what Subnautica does, it is an experience in terror that is just as fantastic as the former, despite employing different strategies to achieve this result. By now you might be thinking, are we only going to look at successful first-person indie games? Not at all. The Sirena Expedition is a small indie horror game that somewhat shares Iron Lung's art style. It didn't, pardon the pun, make waves in the indie game world like the previous titles did, but it brings just as much value to this discussion. In this game, the first set in our actual world, you travel down to the Sirena Deep over at the Mariana Trench and go for a dive. Given this is one of the deepest parts we know of, this isn't quite a simple dive. You go in alone, with a sphere-like submarine and suit specially designed for that depth. Your only connection to the world you know and love is a radio within your helmet. Turns out, surveys of the Sirena Deep have uncovered something, and it's up to you to investigate. This something ends up being an entire, potentially decades-old facility. We're talking corridors, observation rooms, the whole 9 yards. An entire off-the-grid location that no one knew existed, at least not to our knowledge anyway. Exploring it is rather simple. You can walk left to right or vice versa and jump. Occasionally you'll find boxes that you must use to solve puzzles. Push them under a ledge so you can climb up, that sort of stuff. The gameplay is simple, sure, and the story starts off as a bit of a cliche for lots of people, but what the game excels at is its atmosphere. While you explore the facility, you will mostly be accompanied by ambient noises. Bubbles popping as they come out of your helmet, heavy breathing as you use up the air in your oxygen tank. Those will sometimes be broken up by your character and the operator in the radio, but that's still not enough to offset the tension that sets in with the occasional unidentifiable noises you hear. Or maybe the shadowy figures that swim by on background windows. Or even the random eyeballs that open and close in the walls when you reach specific spots in your journey. Most of the game is not outright scary, and for its later half I wouldn't even put it in the horror, or in this case terror, genre. But that first half constantly keeps us guessing and fearful for what's gonna happen to our character. And the game elements only add to that. Your heavy diving suit makes movement slow, and thus you're painfully aware of how much more difficult it would be to outrun anything that attacks you. The abandoned facility is a constant reminder that you're not safe. After all, why would people have left what clearly took a lot of effort to build behind? Well, I guess the random eyeballs popping up in places they shouldn't are also a constant reminder of the lack of safety, but that's too on the nose. Or I in this case, I guess. So let me mention other elements too, dammit. And since we're on the topic of smaller indie games, Silt is, as the Steam store page puts it, a surreal underwater puzzle adventure game. As far as underwater 2D games go, this is one of the most fascinating ones in my opinion. The only context you get for your adventure is a text that reads, "In endless depths, Goliaths roam, beneath the waves and crashing foam. Hunt them down, remove their eyes, for this is where their power lies. A great machine lies deep in wait, awaken it to seal your fate." The text fades to black and the screen opens up to your character, a nameless, faceless diver chained to a mess of gears at the floor of a massive body of water. You'll quickly find out that you have the ability to possess other living beings via literally projecting your soul through the diving helmet's window. As you send your light out of your visor, your body goes stiff, becoming vulnerable up until the moment your soul returns. The game's black and white palette, alongside the strangeness of everything around you, such as the creepy fish you first possess, make it clear that this will not be your typical nice diving adventure. In fact, you're not even sure what creature you control. just that it is no ordinary human. Aside from the whole possession thing, which I'm pretty sure people can't do, your oxygen also never seems to run out, despite the telltale bubbles you often see escaping from your body, as well as the breathing noises that will often be your only companion in these dark depths. Some 10-15 minutes after you start the game, you come across a narrow hallway which eventually leads out into a wide chamber. You just left the body of a huge sea monster. The exit to the chamber has a bright light ball that runs from you, reminiscent of an anglerfish's lure. Following it leads you to being chased by many worm-like creatures and eventually leads you to confront what's called the Gulper Eel, a Goliath that uses its light to bring you in. A single bite from this colossal creature, signaled by its eyes going almost completely dark before lunging at you with a mouth that occupies a good chunk of your screen, is enough to kill you. In fact, almost anything in this game is enough to kill you in a single hit. Silt's atmosphere is oppressive. You don't feel welcome in this ocean of strange creatures, ruins, and machines. And you sure as hell lack the strength to directly do anything about it, so you must use your wits and your super OP ability to possess creatures to fight back. In this game, you'll never quite feel safe as you constantly wonder what this new creature you found will do to kill you, or what dangers lurk in the dark corners of your screen. When you get past the atmosphere, what remains is a limbo-like puzzle adventure that's often regarded as quite easy. But for our purposes, that's fine. It's still a phenomenal experience in building up tension and terrifying the player, even when they know exactly what comes next. However, despite what my examples so far may have made you believe, you don't actually need to be underwater to be afflicted by the terror that it brings. Allow me to introduce you to Dredge, one of 2023's most successful indie releases, sitting at over 20,000 Steam reviews. And it's honestly not hard to see why this game got this much positive attention. It's a breath of fresh air for horror, or terror I guess, aficionados, while dialing the actual fear factor so low that it manages to be accessible by people who normally avoid the genre. In Dredge, we take control of an angler who decides to answer an ad about a town looking for, well, people willing to fish. However, on our way there, a thick fog takes over the open world and we crash into jagged rocks, wrecking our boat. Thankfully, we wash ashore and the mayor of the town gives us a boat on the condition that we pay for it by deducting a set amount from whatever income we make. Hooray for starting your new life saddled with that! I would laugh at my false enthusiasm there if not for the fact that it just makes me depressed due to how true to reality this is. With your new boats in tow, the world is your oyster. Or rather, the archipelago is your oyster, I guess, since there is a limit to how far you can go with your boat, even if fully upgraded. For lots of people, the moment-to-moment gameplay is actually quite relaxing. You go from spot to spot and, well, fish. Sometimes you may drop a little trap for crabs or make some new friends, but you'll mostly be fishing or sailing. However, even though I did enjoy some relaxing moments, I found a good chunk of the game to be anything but relaxing. When you first start the game, the one thing that NPCs keep insisting is that you must be careful not to set sail at night. Of course, that's not a possibility for long, after all, gamers are a curious sort. Well, there is that, but there's also the fact that the night hides lots of exclusive fish. Time also goes by really fast in game, so chances are you will miscalculate and end up braving the night by accident. I know I did. As you sail the waters and dredge, time will pass. As it passes, night falls. When it falls, it brings with it a special kind of fog. The most obvious change that you'll notice straight away come nighttime is the eye. At the top of your screen, an eye will slowly open up and change colors, becoming more frantic, scared, and paranoid as the night goes on. That's your panic meter, and yes, things get progressively worse the higher this meter is. It starts off simple enough. Some chromatic aberration on your screen. Maybe some phantom rocks showing up and damaging your ship if you crash into them. However, refuse to stop and rest at the pores and things will get worse, culminating in even special enemies spawning, like the shark who lunges and wrecks your ship at light speed. Needless to say, sailing while at night is incredibly terror-inducing. There's not only the panic element, but also the fact that it's incredibly hard to see. So if you're being stalked by, say, a huge serpent, you won't be able to see them before they are quite close. But don't worry, you'll be able to hear them, and you will be given plenty of time to stew in your own paranoia wondering what's going on around your ship beyond the veil of darkness. Legitimately, every time I went out at night, even with a fully upgraded ship, I still felt very on edge, unable to relax for a moment. And oftentimes, that feeling would follow me during the day as well, as while the night might have the most enemies and danger, the day also hides quite a few nasty surprises. In Dredge, exploring is essential. You'll find plenty of hidden things that may grant you useful tools and surprises for your journey. There's these hooded people that give books, there's crashed ships to loot, amongst the many other interactables. However, imagine my surprise when, during my own playthrough, I got close to one of said interactables only to have it get up and try to flatten me like a pancake. When I saw this mutant hermit crab that took an entire shipwreck as its shell, even something as simple as looting crashed vehicles became something to be potentially feared. And that's just one example. Look at what happened here when I was doing nothing but minding my own business and traveling between islands. Nothing quite like randomly hearing a roar and trying to figure out where it's coming from. To make matters worse, each major location has a main monster that you must deal with. And dealing with them often means just avoiding them, mind you, which is nerve-wracking. The worst one was, in my opinion, in the beginning-ish of the game, when you enter an area that has lots of cliffs with tight corridors between them. Whenever you enter these corridors via certain entrances, you get chased by a slow-moving but absolutely horrifying colossal sea serpent. The cliffs unfortunately contain key elements to progress in the story, so you're forced to brave the serpent, which is terrifying. Now, in an effort to exercise restraint, I'll leave Dredge there, but I think it's a fascinating title because while it doesn't actually take place underwater, many of the elements that make underwater horror so effective also apply here. But we'll get there in due time. For now, I'm just gonna move on to the last game I want to take a look at before we talk about the effectiveness of underwater horror. Beyond Blue. Hold on, if you've heard of Beyond Blue, don't click off the video and type an angry comment about how this is not horror. Give me a chance to explain, I promise it will make sense. Or at least it does in my slightly unhinged mind, feel free to disagree. For those of you unfamiliar, Beyond Blue is a story-driven game that puts the player in the role of a scientist that's diving for a team, and often live-streaming the dives for a crowd of science enthusiasts. The game has 8 dives, each with its own different objectives, ranging from tagging and recording whale sounds to recovering data from old research equipment that was left within the research zone in the ocean. The gameplay is rather simple and extremely relaxing. You swim from waypoint to waypoint, working on your objectives. If you want, you can take the time to explore the rather small maps and try to scan as many fish as you can find. This is basically a game in which all you do is use Subnautica's scan feature, except with no danger. And I really mean that. Outside of specific cutscenes, all animals ignore you, including sharks and other animals that have a bit of a bad rep. It's kinda like Abzu in that regard, but it goes one step further in my opinion. Beyond Blue tries not just to be relaxing, but also to educate the player, including real facts about each animal and their behavior, as well as footage from documentaries that talk about the real-life counterpart to the issues and animals presented within the game. While this approach wasn't appreciated by some folks, especially given the game's short 2 to 3 hour length focusing on the objectives, I certainly found it very interesting. The game does a lot not only to educate the player, but to remove the fear factor of braving the ocean with really relaxing background music as you dive, as well as constant chatter with your team members and the stream, usually with very laid-back dialogue. Even during the most tense part of the game, which is the dive to the Midnight Zone in which no natural sunlight penetrates, resulting in pitch black darkness, the chatter is constant, lightening the mood and making you feel like you're never actually alone. So with that in mind, I hear you asking, well, it seems like this game is not only relaxing, but also a good tool to work on facing your fears by educating yourself. So why is this game being showcased in a video about the effectiveness of underwater horror? And you know what? Yeah, that's a very good point. I felt it was important to include it to show 2 things. One, that even if you are terrified of underwater environments, you can still find plenty of games you might enjoy. And second, that even an underwater game that tries its best to calm the player down still terrifies some people based on the setting alone. The main culprit for making admittedly very few people that I could find shit their pants is the aforementioned Midnight Zone. Don't get me wrong, the Midnight Zone is a real thing and educating players about it might be necessary. However, things like showing a giant squid reaching up towards the camera might not have been the best move if they really were trying to make players comfortable. And I say this as someone who gets what they were going for, which was showing how a lure can work to attract animals. That's why the squid was moving up slowly, more to portray it as curious rather than a threat. Still, even with moments such as the one I just mentioned, their intentions worked. I've found very few people who mentioned they felt tense or scared playing this game, which is a good thing in my opinion. Even if it did on some rare occasions, this game wasn't meant to scare or put anyone off from playing it, which is a fact confirmed even by the developers on multiple interviews. One during PAX East 2020 made by the Geek generation, link in the description, for example, has a developer stating the following, quote, "We want it to be as serene and peaceful as possible. We want people to not be afraid, so none of the animals are going to hurt you, you can't hurt the animals, and we also don't have to worry about resurfacing for air or anything, so you can just swim for as long as you want and you can go all the way to the bottom, so you can get a whole feel for the ocean in general." End quote. Commendable goal, really. And yet, despite trying to combat the fear, some folks were still tense or scared. How? Why? No, seriously, that's precisely the question we're trying to figure out here. Why does the underwater setting work so well for building tension and inflicting terror? That's not to say it's the only thing the setting is good for, mind you. Abzu, Beyond Blue, and to some degree series like Endless Ocean have proven that diving can be a relaxing experience in games. Even if, like I just established, some rare folks still find these titles scary. But I'm choosing to focus on the terror aspect of the setting because I love it, really. I find the combination of elements that so naturally build up tension fascinating, even if they are not necessarily exclusive to underwater games. Unfortunately, we're likely to never get a real answer. The fact is that some of you might not have felt the terror I speak of with any of the titles I mentioned. Like I said way back then, fear is a very particular thing, and what will cause a reaction from me might not cause a reaction from others. Due to this volatile nature of fear, I don't think I can come up with a definitive foolproof answer about why these games so easily inflict terror upon some of us, but I can certainly share my thoughts and ask you for yours. I've already shared the big one, how real the setting and its potential dangers are, and how that may influence players so that they feel uneasy before they even start to play any given underwater game. But in order to find more answers, these 6 games will be very valuable. There are threads in common between them which help paint a picture of why they are so effective at making people figuratively crap their pants. And what threads are these, you might ask? Well, I'd like to start with the next big one. During the same rock paper shotgun interview I mentioned earlier, Charlie Cleveland says regarding the context of Subnautica's accidental horror, quote, "There are so many primal fears in this game, between the fear of being alone, fear of running out of air, fear of suffocation, fear of open spaces, fear of claustrophobic elements. There's like a lot of fears." And yeah, he's right. All 6 of these games have elements that are tied to their setting that unsettle players in some way, shape, or form. Ignoring the obvious thalassophobia or hydrophobia triggers, I think the biggest factor that comes into play in creating this tense atmosphere is the fear of the unknown. See, these games may have jump scares here and there, but it's not horror they excel at, it's terror. I touched briefly on the subject already, but basically the way I interpret horror is a direct response to danger. You know you're being chased, you're in fight or flight mode, the music is super intense, and you're in pure horror and almost tangible fear. However, terror is more psychological. It's the anticipation of trouble that has yet to happen. It's that feeling of dread when everything is calm and you just know you're about to get jumped. While I am labeling these games as horror titles or having horror elements, I'm only doing so because we don't actually have terror games. The genre is horror. But make no mistake, the underwater setting excels at terror, and the fear of the unknown is one of the main reasons why. In an interview for website Pocket Tactics, Dominic Clark, technical director for Silt, explains really well why water is so effective at creating this fear. When talking about how the game was made, he said, and I quote, "We did a lot of pre-production on this game in a place in Sweden that was next to a huge lake. You could swim out a little bit there and the waters are real brown and there's a little warm layer right at the top. But as soon as your foot accidentally cuts in a meter below the surface, it gets real cold and real creepy and you get touched by little vines and things like that." End quote. What I interpret from this is that, due to the brown water, they couldn't really see the depths, and so their feet were often touched by algae and other things they had no way to prepare themselves for. And then your imagination runs wild trying to figure out what the heck just touched your feet. If you're planning an underwater game filled with dangers, then yeah, I guess this is a great way to do pre-production. The deeper you go underwater, the darker things get. And sometimes, as with Dominic's story, the water coloration is affected by the environment and loses its clear factor, making it hard to see through no matter how close to the surface you might be. This obviously also taps into the fear of darkness that lots of people have, but I think the real danger lies in the unknown. And this is also where real-life knowledge comes into play, at least in my opinion. We know there are some damn freaky fish in our oceans, such as football fish, giant squids, and anglerfish, but then you add in the stories and myths such as the Kraken, Cthulhu, etc., and you just expect bad things to happen when you start playing an underwater game. Hell, you don't even need to go that far. Sharks already get a super bad rap, enough to make them a fearsome encounter in any game that takes place in the water. And then you actually play the game and meet its threats, if any, and you start fearing those instead. Every time I entered a new biome in Subnautica, for example, I'd be shitting bricks wondering if there wasn't a new type of Leviathan just hiding out of sight. Let me give you a clip that demonstrates just how the darkness can hide dangerous creatures. You could easily go on YouTube and look for clip compilations in Subnautica, but since I have no permission to actually use those, I'll instead just use my own from like 4 years ago when I actually streamed regularly. I still had no proper equipment back then, so pardon the lousy audio quality. I promise this clip's not very long.
Now it's too late. Where the... Oh! Okay, that's enough.
See what happened? I was exploring a new place, a cave. I found the exit, which led into one of the darkest areas in the game, and a shark fish thing, I don't know, showed up seemingly out of nowhere and gave me enough of a scare for me to run all the way back the way I came. And while there was a moment of horror, my behavior shows how tense I was before exiting the cave. I hesitated and looked around because I wasn't about to jump into a void without trying to see if anything was waiting for me there. And that, I think, is the main strength of an underwater setting for video games. Anything can be hiding anywhere, and if you're exploring a new location, especially one that lacks light, you'll never quite know if you're truly safe. While my example may have been a bit unorthodox, I'll give you one that you probably lived through yourself if you played Subnautica. Remember when you first approach the Aurora and the water turns a yellow-greenish hue due to the radiation leaking from the ship? Your visibility is limited at that moment, no matter how close to the surface you might be. You can still see rather okay, mind you, but just knowing you can't see as well as you should is enough to terrify folks. But then you add this guy, the Reaper Leviathan, to the mix. How many of you heard this creature before you actually saw it? Because that was the case for me. And while we're talking about limited visibility, don't even get me started on what happens if you leave the map boundaries in Subnautica. Those 3 ghost leviathans still haunt my dreams, or nightmares I guess. This fear of the unknown ends up being so effective in Subnautica partly because it's 3D. In those types of games, you have 6 degrees of freedom, meaning you can literally turn any direction you want, including up or down, so long as there's not a wall there. That also means, however, that you have to worry about being attacked from any direction that's not within your field of view, which definitely adds to the paranoia. You'll never know what's right behind you, for example, unless you turn around, turning your back to potentially another source of danger. I cannot tell you how often I hugged walls when I was playing Subnautica. In 2D games, this particular effect just isn't there, as you can often see a huge chunk of the screen above, below, behind, and in front of your character. But that's not to say 2D games are ineffective at exploring the sphere of the unknown. As I mentioned, Silt's whole pre-production process was based on this specific fear, and the game definitely has moments that take advantage of it. Some enemies, for example, are burrowers, and only show up to eat you after you swim past their location. This means that, even when a corridor is apparently lit up, you can't easily trust your eyes and must pay attention to your surroundings to look for said enemies. If you're shit at spotting these like I am, every time you swim through a corridor will be a source of anxiety for you. Sure, this by itself may not be nearly as inherent of a trait of an underwater setting as the rest of the things I mentioned, but even in a 2D environment, if you're floating underwater, you can still be attacked from anywhere in your screen. And then you have moments in which the game actually uses the darkness, such as this pitch black room. You have a headlight, sure, but who's to say something is not gonna show up behind you as you progress to your chosen destination? In this specific room, it's even worse. Your enemies are leeches that only fear the light, meaning the darkness is quite literally your enemy. The fear of the unknown and the grasp that the inability to see what's coming has on you is so strong that you don't even need to be underwater for it to be relevant to this discussion. The whole time I played Dredge, I was constantly tense, fearing being attacked. The reason why is mainly one factor. You can't see through the water very well, especially at night. So if you're daring to brave the nighttime waters for the exclusive fish and slowly see your panic meter increase and get more frantic, you may just feel more and more anxious that some humongous eldritch creature's gonna show up and attack your ship. Which is a thing that happens. You can't exactly tell what's lurking under you, and that's terrifying, even if you only have one direction to worry about most of the time. At some point, for example, a whale randomly surfaced and ate a huge-ass tentacle, neither of which I was able to see until they surfaced, despite the fact that I was close by. Oftentimes, when you do see a big creature, it's already too late. They're coming for you. But if you think you're safe, at least with the things you find above the water, think again. The game has many traps in place to make you fear even the unknown wrecks or ships you might find. One of my first few nights in the game, for example, I saw a ship just like mine. I decided to honk my ship horn because I wanted to be friendly and actually got an acknowledgement in return, and a trophy. Imagine my surprise then when I approached the ship and it turned out to be a humongous anglerfish that was luring me in. If you can't trust your eyes, you'll always be on edge whenever you visit a new area in the game. And that's precisely what happened to me. And while this isn't as strong of an inherent factor of the underwater setting, these above-water monsters are still sea monsters, using behaviors of well-known sea animals like the anglerfish, or the aforementioned hermit crab. But out of the titles, perhaps the one that does this fear of the unknown thing best is, weirdly enough, a game in which you never intentionally go into contact with the water. Iron Lung. Having to pilot a submarine by slowly adjusting coordinates in a hostile planet without being able to see anything outside is absolutely terrifying. Your only window, if you can call it that, is the camera that takes pictures of the outside for you, and even that has a slight delay between pressing the button and getting the picture taken. This means that if you see a threat when you take a picture, chances are that it's already on top of you by the time you look at it. And hell, if you're not convinced, don't listen to me, listen to the developer. In an interview for YouTube channel Ruby Ranger, David said, and I quote, "To me, what's scary about the concept of Iron Lung is more the being down there and not knowing what's around you, and just getting these hints that you know there's something threatening around you, something you don't understand." End quote. As a bonus, Iron Lung also excels at triggering claustrophobia, as the submarine is tiny. This fear of the unknown is also a good deal responsible, in my view, for the fear some people have when playing Beyond Blue. And perhaps this might be my biggest argument in favor of how some areas underwater can be inherently creepy or scary. Despite the devs trying their hardest to mitigate the fear, some few players still walked away from Beyond Blue feeling scared. 2 of the dives take place in the midnight zone of the ocean, a pitch black area in which no sunlight penetrates anymore, between 1,000 and 4,000 meters deep. That's where we see lots of the creatures we perceive as scary that live within the sea, and yeah, it's no different than Beyond Blue. They try their best to alleviate the feeling of dread that comes with being down there by giving your character lights and by having people constantly talking, but they also make a giant squid swim past you in the darkness or come close to hugging the camera, which is bound to scare some people. Hell, even just swimming in the dark is enough to terrify folks because, again, you never know what's around you, even if you know nothing will hurt you. That's why Charlie called these primal fears. Wow. That's some 3 pages or some good 15 minutes about the fear of the unknown alone. I know it was a lot, but I had to dedicate a good chunk of time to it because it really is the most prominent factor in all of these games. And while I only looked at 6 aquatic games, I guarantee you'll find this aspect in most others. Soma, Echo the Dolphin, whatever you choose to play. It's important to note that this isn't exclusive to this setting. A game set in a dark forest, for example, like I said, can also easily make you terrified and imagine all sorts of dangers. But the point is that the underwater setting inherently lends itself to this by naturally being dark, having plenty of scary creatures, being only 20% explored in our real world, and all the other factors I mentioned. And this applies to pretty much everything in this video. None of the aspects I raised will be necessarily exclusive to the setting. You might even be able to drown while on land by passing out in a bathtub or whatever. However, the setting excels at bringing these aspects into play, and that's where its strength for horror lies. While I focused a lot on the fear of the unknown, that and the other phobias I mentioned are far from being the only aspects that induce terror in players and that are facilitated by the setting. Let me bring your attention to Sirena Expedition. While the game is not really terror-inducing in its second half, at least it wasn't for me, it still excels at showing off an intrinsic trait of the setting, the player's isolation. The game takes place within the Sirena Deep, thousands of meters beneath the surface. Simply put, this means that you can't escape from your current situation, unless you use predetermined escape locations, pods or submarines for example. In Sirena Expedition, there was only one vehicle able to bring the character back to the surface, and if anything went wrong, the player would be stuck at the bottom of the deep. And mind you, the escape vehicles don't necessarily indicate safety either. Iron Lung has the entire game take place within a tiny submarine. Sure, it was basically a piece of junk glued together to last long enough to take a few pictures with no concern for the survivability of the felon we play as, but still, my point stands. In the game, you get to watch as parts break off of your submarine and water slowly floods it, before a monster finally breaks through and ends your life in one ending jump scare. Even though a submarine is mobile, the fact is that if it starts to fail in the depths of an ocean, there is no saving the player. The pressure of the sea continues to work its magic and slowly crumple the vehicle until it breaks apart and the player dies by drowning, being crushed, or just eaten, as is the case with the Iron Lung protagonist. Of course, this doesn't apply to all games, but these two are prime examples of the ocean depths being used to cut the player off from the rest of the world, making them keenly aware that there is no escape from their current situation, at least without highly specialized gear that may just fail anyway. Lots of you may not even think about this isolation, but it certainly weighed in the back of my mind as I play through these games. I really have nowhere to run, huh? Another constant factor that I found when playing through these games was the oxygen. Sirena Expedition had it, Silt had it, and of course Subnautica had it. In the latter, I would say it's a fundamental piece of the puzzle as to why the game manages to be so terrifying. You're constantly having to manage your very life, and failing to keep an eye out on the meter spells certain doom. Though I have to say surfacing for air after the screen goes fully black from the lack of oxygen and still managing to survive is one of the most exciting feelings ever. In Sirena Expedition and Silt, however, you can't die if you run out of air because there is infinite air. No, instead, the oxygen contributes to the terror through other means. One of the most unsettling aspects of these two games was actually their sound design. They were eerily quiet experiences, save for the sound of your character breathing and the oxygen bubbles popping above them. Thus, these elements end up being part of a carefully constructed auditory experience that might very well be one of the most effective terror elements in these games. Words cannot describe how scary it is to hear a sudden crash or a loud, distant roar when all you hear otherwise is silence. Well, silence and your breathing, which some would argue is by itself already very disturbing. You try putting someone breathing on your ear at all times and tell me if you won't feel disturbed. Sirena Expedition specifically goes one step further by giving the player an actual diving suit, one that keeps them linked to the ground, allowing them to walk and jump in the water but at vastly reduced speed. While the game never actually takes advantage of this fact to pose a threat to the player, reduced mobility from being underwater in heavy diving suits especially is definitely something I can see horror games using to their advantage. It's not something any of the ones I looked at use though, so please let me know if you've played any that do use this element to enhance the terror aspect of the game. One last thing I want to talk about is that all of the 6 games I looked at either make the player character very frail, such as Silt, which has the main character dying in one hit to most threats, or make it clear that they are feeble compared to what's out there. Even Beyond Blue does so, with sections such as the Midnight Zone with the giant squid. This is obviously not really anything new for horror games, with plenty having you run from your pursuers instead of being able to fight back, but it's still fascinating to see all of them intentionally or accidentally give off this vibe that you're nothing compared to the threats that reside underwater. I think this ties back into the Cthulhu, Kraken and other myths that exist, in which no one human is able to alone stand up to these monstrous creatures. Being able to fight back would in some way reduce the tension of having to deal with these big, long-feared monsters that lurk beneath the surface. Well, that was a lot, wasn't it? I'm not so pleased to say though that this is all I could come up with in my research. There's more I want to say and that I couldn't fit anywhere really, so stick with me just a bit longer. Turns out that the exercise of comparing multiple games and trying to find clues and evidences as to why a certain setting works is a really fun exercise, but it made me realize even more than I was actually looking for. Since this video is already massive anyway, I might as well just share the other realizations I had, even if they are not relevant to the main topic discussed. One quick thing I want to talk about are the monsters. We've already gone over the fact that lots of games use aquatic monsters or threats as a source of danger that you're feeble against. But funnily enough, 2 of the titles in the list also use them as a way to protect against people escaping the map. Why put up an invisible wall when you can just toss a bunch of huge creatures to eat the escapee? And honestly, I get why they do it. It's very effective and manages to be terrifying as well. The games that do so are Subnautica and Dredge, in case you were curious. Another aspect that became clear to me when doing research and writing this script is that a lot of what makes underwater horror special can also be applied to space horror. The 6 degrees of freedom, at least in zero gravity zones, the isolation and inability to escape your situation, the uncertainty of what's out there, even the suffocation, which has the aquatic equivalent of drowning. This was naturally an interesting realization that almost threw a wrench in my video. For a while I was like, well, that means there's no point to actually making this video because there's nothing special about underwater horror. But I quickly realized that's not actually the case either. And even if it was, the games I played are all aquatic games, not space games, so the video works. In reality though, the settings share a lot of traits but are still very different. I think the main point in which the 2 settings differ, aside from the obvious stuff that one is full of water and the other is full of void, is that aquatic horror is simply more relatable, more grounded, ironically enough. We have huge unexplored oceans within our very planets and we know there's things down there, even if we don't know all of them. Drowning and being trapped underwater are also way easier situations for folks to imagine than suffocating from being stuck in a vacuum, for example. And then we can also get into how these settings are usually used. Lots of space-centered games are sci-fi experiences, while I tend to see more varied backdrops of underwater horror. It might also be why I prefer the latter setting, as I'm not a huge fan of sci-fi in general. At the end of the day though, none of this matters. Even if both share similarities, the settings are different and pretty good in their own right. I'm just speaking about the water-related one because it's what I prefer, but who knows, maybe I'll do a space-centered follow-up. That'd be cool. Something else to note that didn't really come from my comparison of the 6 games, but rather from a general perception of the gaming scene, is that water levels are rather infamous. We have as examples that one classic level from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or the general disdain lots of people have for the Mario water stages. But I'll even go one step further and say that water sections tend to be some of the most terrifying parts of horror games that have nothing to do with the underwater setting. A classic example would be that one accursed stage in Amnesia that has you jumping from box to box to avoid an invisible monster. It works so well to make you terrified because you can't actually see the monster. Instead, the water ends up being the clear indicator that it's there and that you're in danger, as splashes indicate something moving slowly towards your direction. It creates such a visceral fear in the player that I can't actually describe. You have to experience for yourself. The last thing I want to talk about is why games specifically. A lot of these arguments can work for other media such as movies as well, after all. And yeah, true, not all of the arguments, but most. I guess the simple and main answer is that games are just my preferred media and the focus of my channel. I would wager, however, that it's also more effective at terrifying the player than any other form, simply due to the fact that there is user interaction here. You sit down to watch a movie and you can walk out terrified, but for me at least, having to be the one to control the character is much more immersive, and thus terrifying. Especially in VR. I know I will absolutely shit my pants if I try playing Subnautica in VR. Yet, the masochist in me still wants to give it a shot someday. If only these headsets weren't so damn expensive. And that's it! For me at least, this whole analysis made it clear that yeah, underwater horror is incredibly effective. I mean, I already knew that, but it's nice to look at why. Now, I'll leave you all with a question as a parting gift. Or many questions. What is your favorite setting for a horror game? Regarding the video, do you agree with the points I raised? Do you disagree? Do you think I missed something important? Do you hate water levels in games? What was your experience with any of the games I mentioned? In fact, if you like the setting, what is your favorite underwater/aquatic game? You don't have to answer all of these questions, or any of them really, but it would be nice to see what you all have to say on the subject, even if it's just via one of those questions. Absolutely love this setting, so at the end of the day, this is just a guy sharing his passion with the world and hoping to maybe hear something back. This video was a lot of fun to work on, and I hope it brought some enjoyment to you. If it did, please do leave a like and subscribe, as both actions really help out my channel. But above all else, drop a comment. Reading what you all have to say is genuinely a highlight of my time making videos, and it helps me improve on my crazy craft. That aside, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Bye bye!